How is Ferrari preparing for this weekend in China, also in view of the sprint race? In today's video, we are going to analyze this, and in addition, I want to tell you also the secret that McLaren uses to go faster than the opponents. We also have to look at the statements of Russell and Norris, and at the end of the video, we have to talk about the bad news from Eddie Jordan. Before we start, to support me, please leave a supportive like, and now let's look at everything in detail. The Chinese Grand Prix is Ferrari's opportunity to bounce back after a tough weekend, as we've mentioned, in Melbourne, where the true potential of the SF25 did not emerge. However, this doesn't mean the red one is Shanghai's favorite. After weeks of excitement and ambitious statements about the title fight, the team's performance in Australia has left more than a few doubts. According to many insiders, the result achieved at Albert Park does not reflect the real value of the single-seater. However, in Shanghai, Ferrari will have the opportunity to demonstrate whether it was just an isolated incident. Meanwhile, the first images coming from the Chinese circuit allow us to analyze the team's approach in terms of aerodynamic configuration, awaiting track confirmations. A first look at the car from the pit suggests that the load level chosen by Ferrari is in line with the characteristics of the track. Never as in the era of wing cars, the aerodynamic balance is crucial. The performance differences between those who find the optimal setup and those who only get close can be huge, especially with the sprint race format scheduled for this weekend. In the Australian weekend, Ferrari opted for a rear wing with more downforce than the track required, a choice that generated quite a bit of discussion. We also saw it on the track. Opponents overtook more easily because Ferrari, compared to Red Bull and especially McLaren, had a lower top speed. In Shanghai, the team will maintain the same specification from the first race of the year, but may introduce updates soon. The engineers at Maranello are trying to maximize the understanding of the SF25 with the current load level, seeking a balance between top speed and stability in the most challenging curves. The Shanghai track presents a mix of long straights and technical curves, so finding the right compromise will be crucial. Compared to the past season, Ferrari seems to have changed their approach. In 2024, the SF24 struggled in the second sector of the Chinese circuit due to an aerodynamic configuration with less load, initially chosen in the pre-season tests in Bahrain and maintained in the first appointments of the championship. Now, however, the SF25 seems to be leaning towards a heavier configuration, a sign that the team has worked to improve the car's rotation and reduce the understeer highlighted in Australia. With just one session, free practice before the sprint qualifying, the time for adjustments will be limited. The track will be the final judge of Ferrari's strategy, which aims to regain competitiveness and put aside the difficulties of Melbourne. In short, the red one has chosen the same level of aerodynamic load as Melbourne.
For this,
the second race of the season is in China, but the track characteristics differ from the Australian circuit. In fact, you need to have more aerodynamic load in China compared to Australia. In China, it's more reasonable. Ferrari might lose something in the last sector due to the long straights. However, it will excel in the first and second sectors where time is ultimately made. On the lap, not having much time available, it will be crucial to get the setup right immediately. Ferrari has consistently demonstrated strength over the years, particularly on weekends with sprint races. And the sprint format offers an interesting opportunity with just one session. In free practice before the sprint qualifying, who will be able to work well on the simulator? In the factories could gain a decisive advantage. Furthermore, the possibility of changing setup after the sprint race allows teams to take advantage of Saturday with a sort of additional test and then show up more competitive for the Sunday race. Even though Norris's McLaren, Piastri are the favorites this weekend. The complex weekend schedule could also favor teams that can better adapt to the track conditions. This format was designed specifically to reduce the time dedicated to fine-tuning the cars, forcing the teams to work with a solid base from the start. And if the circuit of Melbourne did not provide reliable answers, Shanghai will instead offer more significant feedback thanks to its technical configuration. The most challenging sector is the long uphill bend after the main straight, characterized by variable radius curves and counterslope. Here, the thermal capacity of the tires will be a key factor. The track features a combination of slow and fast corners and long straights, elements that will help understand the aerodynamic deficiencies of the Ferrari. If structural problems emerge on the S25, the team will have to act immediately, collecting useful data for the next Grand Prix in Suzuka, another crucial test bench. Red Bull has already demonstrated last year in Qatar that a sprint weekend can be used to solve setup problems. At Losail 2024, Verstappen's RB20, Perez struggled in the first free practice session, finishing outside the top 10. However, the team used the sprint race as a test session to gather data, and after modifying the car for Sunday, they then dominated the Grand Prix. Ferrari could adopt a similar strategy in China. If the weekend doesn't start off on the right foot, the sprint race could be used as a testing ground to find a better setup for the main race. The hope is that the Chinese weekend will prove that what happened in Australia was just a bump in the road. If that's not the case, Ferrari could take a cue from the strategy adopted by Red Bull at Lusail, using the sprint to optimize the SF25 for Sunday. The McLaren is the car to beat, but the season is still long. The SF25 needs to prove it can bridge the gap, and the China Grand Prix is a key step to understand the real potential of Ferrari. The McLaren arrives in China as the favorite, according to all teams and drivers. The current situation resembles last year's Red Bull's early races, where they dominated until the Miami Grand Prix, causing other teams to abandon their championship aspirations. But we know how it ended last year, so be careful, because when the level is so high, all the teams are very close to each other because we are at the end of a regulatory cycle. It is never said that the favorite team then wins all the races or that it dominates the season. On the contrary, quite the opposite. But what is the secret of the McLaren MCL39? McLaren has introduced a very interesting technical solution in Formula 1, focused on the front axle of the MCL39. The key element is a particular hub design, which allows for efficient management of the heat developed by the braking components, improving the operating window of the tires. The system uses an airflow that is channeled from the inside of the wheel to the outside through specific ducts. During this passage, the heat generated by the brakes is dissipated, helping to keep the tires at the ideal temperature. It is an aerodynamic and thermal solution that is bound to spark discussion during the season. The principle is that of heat exchange. Analyzing the design of the McLaren MCL39, it is possible to notice an air intake with a layout studied in the smallest details. The fluid dynamics simulations of these components are extremely
complex, since
they must take into account variables such as the intricate geometry of the system, thermal behavior, and wheel movement. The key element of this configuration is an inner lip that divides the flow into two main channels. This feature increases the heat exchange surface in the brake basket, promoting more effective heat dissipation. The result is better control of the front tire temperature and more stable management of their operating window. And this is a key advantage in tire management. In fact, during the first round of the Formula 1 World Championship, McLaren demonstrated better management of tire degradation than their opponents, an aspect also noticed by rivals. Russell highlighted how the MCL39S were particularly competitive in the third sector of Melbourne thanks to their ability to maintain a constant tire compound temperature. The technical analysis suggests that this particular hub configuration is one of the key factors behind McLaren's performance. The solution allows for improved activation of the front axle while maintaining a more predictable and uniform tire behavior throughout the entire race stint, and this also helps avoid thermal synchronization between the axles. What does it mean? In addition to the cooling system, McLaren has integrated two aerodynamic appendages that direct the airflow downwards. This downwash effect solution reduces the turbulence generated by the front wheel and optimizes the aerodynamic balance of the car. The adoption of this technology is linked to another design choice by McLaren, the high percentage of anti-dive in the front suspension of the MCL39. This adjustment improves the aerodynamic behavior of the car, but it can carry the risk of thermal synchrony between the axles. Pierre Roachet, technical director of Red Bull, has already highlighted the risks associated with excessive anti-dive, which can reduce the load transfer on the front tires, limiting their thermal activation. However, McLaren has managed to compensate for this problem thanks to the heat management system in the hub, ensuring a uniform temperature between the front and rear. Thanks to this combination of technical solutions, the MCL39 seems to have found an optimal balance between aerodynamics and thermal management, an aspect that could prove crucial in the continuation of the championship. In fact, while everyone focuses on the flexible wing, which is a questionable element, and we'll also talk about it shortly, one of the biggest advantages of McLaren is having an excessive anti-dive at the front, because it's a more pronounced anti-dive than Ferrari, Red Bull, and its competitors, despite both Red Bull and Ferrari having the pull rod at the front. But the real secret lies in the brake basket. They managed to cool that area more by channeling airflows downwards, thus further feeding the floor and the venturi channels in turn. And this allows better management of turbulence and excessive heat, and also increasing the aerodynamic load. The real secret of McLaren's current success is the downforce generated by the floor. which allows it to have more aerodynamic load and better manage the tires. But let's see the trick to maximize the local load through the flexible rear wing. We know some videos collected in Melbourne have highlighted suspicious movements on various specifications of rear wings. Once again, the aeroelasticity is under examination and the Federation does not seem willing to turn a blind eye to the matter. One of the most used tricks involves the strategic positioning of carbon skins within the structure of the rear wing. This allows the aerodynamic elements to flex more than allowed, without, however, failing the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile static tests. Another technique involves the anchoring system to the frame, a targeted management of structural rigidity that allows the wing to change its position during driving, exploiting the aerodynamic load generated at high speeds. The principle is simple. On the straight, when the rear of the car lowers due to the maximum downforce, the incidence of the wing decreases, reducing the aerodynamic resistance, the so-called drag. In a curve, when the speed decreases and the vertical load decreases, the wing returns to its original position, ensuring the maximum downforce necessary for grip. We already know that from this Grand Prix in China, a new technical directive will come into force and therefore a smaller deformation of the rear wing will be allowed compared to the past races. And therefore a smaller deformation of the rear wing will be allowed compared to the race in
Australia. McLaren
seems to have interpreted the rules in an extremely intelligent way. The rear wing of the MCL39 features a second flap designed to generate a greater local load in the outermost areas where the airflow is faster. In essence, McLaren has found a way to get more downforce in corners without penalizing top speed, a crucial balance to maximize performance on all circuits. That's why the battle between Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile and teams over wing flexibility continues, and it's just the beginning. Will the new directive be enough to limit these expedients, or will the teams find new ways to circumvent the restrictions? Shanghai will certainly be a decisive first test. Unfortunately, it's an endless battle, as has been said many times. In the sense that everyone will always dispute how much to flex at the front or rear, and there will never be a point of agreement between Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile and teams. Because there will always be a team that will flex a carbon component more than the others. It's natural because they are components made from carbon fibers, intertwined elements, and just changing their composition can lighten the component or not. There will always be a team that will gain more advantage than the others, even though all teams on paper pass the static tests on carbon components. So we'll see if McLaren's performance changes this weekend, but in my opinion, this new directive won't affect the Woking team because they already know how to respond in
this regard. However,
this is Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile's first battle. That said, we must also consider George Russell's remarks about McLaren. The Mercedes driver, after the Australian Grand Prix, had highlighted the technical dominance of the MCL39, suggesting that the Woking team could already shift its focus to 2026. The Brit is no stranger to strong statements. In 2023, after the initial races, he predicted the Red Bull RB19's total dominance, suggesting it could win every race that season. A prediction almost hit the mark, given that the only defeat for Adrian Newey's car came in Singapore with the victory of Ferrari and Carlos Sainz.
In China,
Russell has once again leaned on the strength of McLaren while highlighting a possible weak point compared to Red Bull 2 years ago. Russell said their advantage is huge, but they won't win all the races. Their car should win every race, but I don't think it will. We'll see. The advantage they have over their opponents is the biggest ever seen in Formula 1. Even bigger than Red Bull's in 2023, that one. According to Russell, Max was always reliable when driving. Every lap in Q3 was perfect, never a doubt. We have to be ready to capitalize on every opportunity. Like what happened in Melbourne, which should have been a 1-2 finish. McLaren Russell also quantified the technical gap of the MCL39. In 2023, Red Bull had a 3/4 of a second advantage per lap. McLaren is now significantly ahead with further additions. If we're talking about making up that gap in terms of downforce, it's impossible to do it in one season. They are doing something better than the others. They are faster than everyone when the tires get up to temperature. Russell specified as in the third sector. In Melbourne, the McLaren was 4/10 faster than everyone else. It was the same car in the first two sectors. The only difference was the thermal management of the tires. It's an area where the margin for improvement is reduced because the rules impose clear limits. They are clearly exploiting something very advanced, and that gap is
huge. And
Russell confirmed that the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile directive on wing flexibility will not impact their performance, in his opinion. If the directive had been enforced in Melbourne, they would have still won, as they are too far ahead. Russell said McLaren MCL39 may struggle with tire cooling despite being the best at it, as seen in 2024. In Singapore and Zandvoort, tracks with high temperatures and heavy degradation, they were significantly faster. However, they were not competitive on the cold asphalt in Las Vegas. The Mercedes driver suspects that on tracks with low grip or low temperatures, McLaren might have difficulties. I'm sure they have an ace up their sleeve to handle this problem as well. They know very well where they might struggle and they are already working to solve it. And even Lando Norris himself has commented on the new directive that will come into effect in China. He said the directive doesn't concern us, so we don't have to change anything. Our wing is fine, in fact, it's probably too fine. Maybe we're not pushing the limits enough, honestly. So no, if this technical directive had been in force in Melbourne, we would have been fine anyway. It's not a rule designed for us, it seems to concern other teams, which probably means we should push a little more. And Norris also added, the car is fast, it behaves well, but it's still very hard to drive. We know that in certain conditions, like in the wet, Max was as fast as us. In drier conditions, we did better. We're trying to make the car more predictable and more comfortable. The car is already at a great level, I can't complain too much, but both Oscar and I have pointed out some things to improve. The boys and girls in the factory have a clear direction on what we want to perfect. The car is fantastic, but we desire more. Hopefully we can improve with less difficulty. In Australia, we had a great race. We had a lead of about 15 seconds halfway through the race. Then the safety car reset everything, but we are confident. This is another weekend, another track, and I expect a more competitive Ferrari. Finally, Norris said, we've seen how fast Red Bull was. They're not out of the game, they're just as competitive. In qualifying, we can make a difference, but in the race, the gaps are minimal. It will be interesting to see in China if Norris is hiding behind these statements, because saying that the McLaren is hard to drive seems a bit risky. And I believe a bit more in what Russell said compared to what Norris said, but in my opinion, Norris wants to downplay their advantage to put less media pressure on McLaren. But we also have to comment on the sad news about Eddie Jordan. The Jordan family has communicated, well, with deep sadness, that we announced the passing of Eddie Jordan, former owner of the Formula 1 team, television commentator and entrepreneur. He died peacefully with his family by his side in Cape Town in the early hours of March 20th, 1925 after battling an aggressive form of prostate cancer for 12 months. He worked until the end, communicating just a few days ago on St. Patrick's Day his ambitions for the London Irish Rugby Football Club, of which he had recently become the owner. Jordan left an indelible mark in Formula 1 as the owner of the Jordan Grand Prix, a team active from 1991 to 2005. Michael Schumacher made his debut in Formula 1 at the 1991 Belgium Grand Prix driving a Jordan. The team participated in 250 Grand Prix, winning 4 of them. Damon Hill's at Spa in 1998, Frenzens with 2 victories in 1999, where Jordan came 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, and with Giancarlo Fisichella at Interlagos in 2003. Eddie Jordan was one of the biggest figures in the history of Formula 1, and that's why I wanted to remember him in this video. Let me know your opinion in the comments on all the topics we've covered. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos that come out here on the channel. I provide daily updates on Formula 1 news, focusing especially on Ferrari-related topics. I'll leave you with some related videos here from Rastretuto. We'll see you in the next video.